WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
Views expressed on the following program are not necessarily those of WPSL. However, we're the ones who have encouraged you all along to like and share them on social media and with all your friends and neighbors, because Careology, a 501c3 that you can support. We'll find out how. Stay tuned. We'll show you, because this is the Science of Caring, Careology, hosted this morning by the one and only McGrath.
Cliff, thank you so much. Welcome to Monday. That swap shop, that was a great episode.
It's nice when we have a lot of participation, good stuff today, too.
Awesome. Well, if you're tuning in, this is Careology, and Careology is a wing of CareBag. And as we do with every show, we like to start out and talk a little bit about what we do at CareBag. CareBag is, as Cliff said, a nonprofit that supports our friends who without walls, or we could call the homeless population, that live along the Treasure Coast, all the way from Vero down to Palm Beach. We've got three shower units that we send out to different locations where people can get clean and get a shower, get some dignity. And we also have a pantry van that goes out to different areas where food is distributed, and we distribute diapers, shampoo, wipes, Depends, sanitary items for the ladies out there, and to provide dignity for that population that maybe can't get to those products. So we're always looking for volunteers at CareBag. We have folks that want to monetarily contribute. We have fun ways to do that. We have a fundraiser tea party happening Saturday, March 30th from 12 to 4 p.m. at Treasure Coast. Lexus, one of our amazing sponsors, is giving us the space to do that. So if you are interested in being part of that wonderful tea party event, you go to carebagfl.org. You can register and be a sponsor of the event. You could call 772-222-7399 to get your tickets. The tickets are $50 each, or you can buy a whole table. So again, that is the fundraiser tea party that's happening, high tea at the Gardens at Treasure Coast, Lexus, that's going on. And later in the year, if you're interested, we have a Taste of the Rainbow happening at Fujiyama Steakhouse, where we have some celebrity chefs are going to be cooking, and that's May 7th in honor of Mother's Day at 6 p.m. If you want to do that event and help out there, we would appreciate it. And then we have our back to school event happening in August, on the 11th of August, where we do haircuts for kids, and we have folks that step up and provide backpacks for the kids with stuff so they're ready to go back to school. So those are just some of the ways you can get involved. On the day-to-day, we always are looking for folks to help stock the van and work with our staff to get those vans in place, get the items in place, and take care of the shower units. There's so many ways you can help out at CareBag. So with Careology, our job at Careology is to provide awareness in the community on topics that relate to health and wellness. And in thinking about the show for today, the topic of neurodiversity has come up a lot. We think about folks with autism, folks that have struggling with different things, maybe parents of children that have these situations. And so I thought, who could I invite on that is an expert on that area? And again, my daughter is an expert in this area on many levels, and her name is Grace McGrath. Welcome to the show, Grace.
Well, thank you so much.
It is an honor and a delight to have you here to talk about this topic that I think affects so many people. And I wanted to start out, Grace, by asking you if you could, there's some misconceptions around what neurodiversity is. It's a big umbrella. How would you define neurodiversity?
I would define it as the variation with people's brains. So that includes like a lot of different conditions. So it can include dyslexia, autism, ADHD. So it's just about the natural variation within humans' brains.
Now, as we go about in society, there's sometimes people get labeled, they get put in different categories. What about this subject? How did you get interested in neurodiversity?
It's a great story, actually. So I was living in Montana after graduating from undergrad from the University at Albany, and I was struggling a lot with just social situations and just generally in life. I was sort of having a hard time with some things. And so I was talking to a friend of mine and just I was describing the troubles I was going through and stuff like that. And they said, "Hey, it sounds like you have autism." And at first I
Hmm.
was like, there's no way that's like possible because I'm not like Sheldon Cooper from the Big Bang Theory. And that's what I thought autism was. And I decided, you know what, I'll just do some research, hear them out. Maybe they're right. And I was looking at that time, like women who have autism, like the traits that folks have in that group. And I was relating a lot to what they were discussing. And I was like, you know what, maybe I do. So I talked to a medical professional who then referred me to the hospital in Bozeman and I got tested and then I got my results. So that's sort of how it happened. It's definitely something that, is just conversation led to it. And I finally got the answer in that arena.
How did that change for you, just having that awareness? Did that make a difference for you?
It definitely did because I was having some issues at work, not understanding things. So I was really passionate, as which is it's good to be passionate, but I wasn't understanding how my level wasn't equating well with like the work I was doing. So it was causing me some uncomfortable situations, and people were like, making jokes that I couldn't tell were jokes and things like that, where I just wasn't really tuning in to what people were discussing, and it was making me feel a little less than. So it was something that I was glad that I finally figured out because I was able to advocate for myself and let people know what was going on with me and just giving people more information. So I'm not seen as like really obtuse because I'm not trying to be obtuse. That's just sort of how I am.
So can you give like a simple example of maybe a situation for you personally, where having this realization helps you kind of understand how people are reacting to you and how you're reacting to the world?
For sure. So I think there's two good examples that I'll give. So the first one was so your mom, Oma, as we called her, made cookies that were sent to me in Montana, which was also very nice when she would do that. And I brought some to the office to sort of share her good baking with the office, right? And so the head of the office for my division um, was like, "Oh, Grace, you're almost gonna have to make cookies for the whole office now because everyone really likes these cookies." And I was like, "Oh no, how's Oma gonna make cookies for like the whole 50-person plus office? Like, I don't understand how that's gonna happen." I was like freaking out. Like, I was like, "Oh no, what did I do?" And he could clearly see that I was freaking out over Zoom. And I was like, "What am I supposed to do?" Because I was joking, and like things like that where I took him really seriously, and I was then concerned I was gonna have to tell Oma, "Oh, you're going to have to send me cookies for the whole office." So that was one example.
So that taking it for a literal
Yeah.
situation, not realizing there's a nuance there.
Yeah, I had no idea. I was like, "Oh no, like this is going to be a lot of work for Oma to do because I don't bake." So I was like, I don't know how I was going to help out. And then another example was when I was working, I work at Marymount University, but in another role I had at the university, we were interviewing with a client, and the boss at the time was wanting feedback on a project but wanted to hear from them, not me. But I took it to mean he wanted my feedback as well. And so I was like giving my ideas, giving my perspective, and I couldn't tell like in the conversation that he was hinting that he didn't want my feedback because I couldn't cue into like that sort of subliminal message within the conversation. And so because he knew I had autism, it wasn't seen as me being like weird about everything. So it actually ended up to be a good thing that I had been honest with him about it, so I wasn't seen as like trying to make his life harder.
So checking in on the kind of hidden meanings of things, or
Yeah.
the assumed meanings in a casual conversation, can sometimes be a challenge for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So after this awareness that, these are some reasons why maybe you were frustrated with social interactions and whatnot, did that open things up on the whole topic of neurodiversity for you? How did that change your kind of view on the topic itself?
It gave me a lot more understanding, I would say, because I've seen autism outside of like my own lived experience, and I didn't really understand it. And I just was like, well, people should just suck it up and like deal with their situations. And I didn't have a much empathy at the time for people who were going through it, because I only had like my experience, and that was because I was learning how to mask. And that's something I can get into, where it's just sort of like you're acting, you're playing a role within your life, and you're sort of forcing yourself to conform to the neurotypical majority of society and everything like that. And so because I was doing that every day, I was like, if I'm doing that, then why can't everyone else do that? And that people shouldn't have to do that. So I've gained a lot more empathy and understanding, which has been nice. And it was also helpful to have a friend who I worked with in Montana, who also is neurodiverse. And so when I told her, hey, I'm neurodiverse, she goes, oh my gosh, how could I not tell? And like it was a great way for us to sort of bond. And that's how we sort of came up with our business consulting idea, was based off both of us being neurodiverse and just wanting to give back and share our understanding with our clients to sort of build up that knowledge network and stuff like that.
So when you say masking, let's dig a little deeper into that. What do you mean by masking?
So I think a great way to describe it is, when you're seeing a television show and people are acting out these characters, masking is a lot like that. So it's like playing a role within your own life where you're not exactly yourself. You're just trying to conform to what society expects of you. So like a great example would be eye contact is something I struggle with. And so when I mask, I force myself to make eye contact, even though it makes me really uncomfortable, because I know that if I don't do that, I'll be seen as like disrespectful if I'm not making eye contact with someone. And another example would be just learning how to act in conversation. So specifically with autism, people struggle with social emotional reciprocity. So what that means is when you're in a conversation with someone and they're like, how are you doing? And you answer, oh, I'm doing fine. Typically, you're supposed to ask how the other person's doing. And that's not something I'm super great at doing. And so it's something I've had to learn how to sort of act in conversation by making sure that I'm being, reciprocal with that type of stuff. Because when I got tested for autism, I remember now, like looking back on it, the evaluator was like, I'm going to vacation in Florida. And I was like, great. And I was supposed to ask him like what he was planning to do and things like that. And I just didn't even think to do that. I was like, oh, he just wanted to tell me he's going to Florida. Right. So I didn't take that to mean there's more to the conversation that needed to be had. And so a lot of it is just trying to play a role that society expects of you, which can be really challenging for people.
So my question there is that a learning thing of just not awareness of what the appropriate social behaviors are, or do you feel like, based on your experience, there's some way your brain is functioning that it's just not connecting the dots in a social setting? Do you feel there's a little bit of both there? What are your thoughts there as somebody kind of struggling with this?
I think I always turn to what the comedian Hannah Gatsby said in one of their Netflix specials, where they sort of described they're autistic themselves. And so they described that being autistic is like being a sober person in a room full of drunk people. And so that's sort of how I view it sometimes as well, where you can't necessarily cue in to what everyone else is on, like the vibration frequency everyone else is dealing with. And so you sort of have to puzzle piece your life together to figure out what's going on. And I'm glad I know now that I have it, because I was having a lot of trouble like understanding things, especially in a workplace. When I was in college, I had more ability to sort of, do different things, and I was constantly learning new stuff and around like college students. So it was less of like a formal atmosphere. But once I got into the working world, I wasn't understanding what everyone else was cued into. And so I guess everyone masks is what I would say. Like people are not their full selves in a lot of scenarios in their life. But I think especially for people who are neurodiverse, it's a lot more that you have to do with that scenario. And especially people who are self-identifying females, oftentimes society teaches you certain ways they want you to behave. So they tend to be a little bit more skilled at doing it just because they're forced to by society.
Would you say it's like it's an energy, emotional energy, that it takes more energy to really focus and concentrate when you're in a social situation because you're trying to pay attention to all these things that don't come natural? Is that part of it?
I would say so. And I think a good example of this is I was part of SUNY SA when I was in undergrad.
Now, when you say SUNY, what do you mean
So
there?
State University of New York
Oh,
Student Assembly. So
okay.
it's one of the student government organizations that's part of the SUNY system. And so we had a big conference in Albany where I was going to school. And it was a whole day event of being around people, having conversations, and I was overstimulated. It was a whole thing. And once I got back to my dorm room, I was so exhausted. I just started to cry because I couldn't understand how to deal with what I was going through. So it was definitely very challenging. And I didn't understand why doing something basic like going to a conference would cause me so much strife, right? And so now I know it was because I was overstimulated. I was dealing with a lot of people, and I wasn't able to self regulate at all in that experience. So I was just so exhausted from doing basic things.
You know, this term self-regulate, I want to tap into that a little bit, but it, how do you know, like, how do you have it like an escape valve? If, you know, you were sharing with me a few months ago that you were going to go to a conference, I forget, I think it was Atlanta,
Hmm.
that you said you went to. So let's take that as an example. Knowing what you know now, how did you prepare yourself? Because in your line of work in forensic psychology, you're studying that, you want to, you know, you want to meet these people that are the leading that field, you have to go to conferences. So how did you prepare yourself going to that conference?
I prepared myself by knowing that I would need to take breaks. And I made sure that I got proper sleep. I was, hanging out by myself when I needed to be. I wasn't, going to too many events where I was having to talk to a lot of people. I just really picked and chose what I needed to do in terms of like making sure I wasn't overstimulating myself. But I also, stim, which is something almost a lot of people do that even aren't neurodivergent, where hair twirling, things like that. But for me, just sort of playing the imaginary piano is a way that I sort of, calm down from just feeling like there's a lot going on. So allowing myself to do that openly was helpful in terms of just like taking my mind off what I was dealing with. But I think that conference in Atlanta was super great in terms of everyone was really understanding that not everyone was going to be at every single event, and it was good that breaks were encouraged and stuff like that.
So this brings up an important point, and why I wanted to have you on is for folks that aren't as familiar with what it's like. They're not neurodiverse, or maybe they don't have a child that has autism. What would you say to them to help them open that bridge of understanding so they can try to see the world through the eyes of somebody who's kind of experiencing the world a little differently? How do you bridge that gap?
I would say the first thing to know is there's not one way neurodivergence looks. There's not one way autism looks or ADHD looks. So if someone's telling you, hey, I have autism, and your immediate response is, well, you don't look autistic. Well, what does autism look like? Because it's different with every single person. So I've had sometimes people, even in like the medical profession, when I tell them respond and say, well, you don't look autistic, I'm like, well, there's just not one way for that to look. So the first thing is just sort of believe people when they tell you and be like, oh, thank you for letting me know. Because it is being vulnerable. There's a really high unemployment rate within the autistic community. Either people are underemployed or unemployed. And if someone is being honest with you, especially in a work setting that they have autism, that's a really brave thing for people to do. So you want to make sure that you're being understanding and being open to that. You don't necessarily have to be an expert because not everyone can be an expert in neurodiversity. So just immediately just be understanding, just be like, thank you for letting me know. And I think the next thing to do is just maybe do your own research, like learn the criteria from the DSM or
When you
listen.
say DSM,
Diagnostic Statistical Manual. That's something that's used a lot in the mental health psychiatry professions to sort of diagnose people. Listen to lived experiences. There's so much of that on YouTube. And just ask questions, with the person if they feel comfortable with answering those for you. And I think the other thing is to give people the benefit of the doubt. Most people aren't trying to make your life hard. And I was lucky, especially in Montana and in my jobs at Marymount, that people are understanding of what I'm going through. They're not trying to make my life more difficult, and it just requires me to advocate for myself. So if someone's like, hey, I really need a quiet space to sometimes hunker down to get work done, don't be like, well, that's not possible, or we can't do that for you. Try to make that accommodation, or try to make something that's equivalent to it if it's available to do so. So I think just be understanding, and just think, how would I feel if I told someone something really personal to me and they responded with, oh, that's not possible, or I don't see that for you. Like, no one would like that. So you just want to make sure you're listening to people where they're at.
you shared a story with me about a time at work where things got overstimulated, where it was too loud. You were trying to get work done, and maybe in a typical setting, people would be able to focus, but for whatever reason, could you share that might help some people kind of realize, it's not just somebody doesn't want to do work. It might be because they literally can't concentrate. Can you share that story?
For sure. So I was working at Marymount in the College of Business Innovation, Leadership and Technology, or known as BUILT, and it was an open office setting. And so it would be people coming up to talk to us. I'd be on the phone, or I'd be trying to read an email, and it was just, I can't filter out the sound the way everyone else can, so I hear everything at the same volume. So like, let's say I was on the phone and I was trying to hear what someone was saying, but 3 people were talking around me. I couldn't even focus on what was going on because I couldn't filter out what was happening. So oftentimes, if you're in like a party setting, you're listening to the person talking to you, you're not really paying attention to what everyone else is saying unless your name is said, and that's called the cocktail party effect. But unless your name is said, you're pretty good at focusing on what the person in front of you is saying. But for me, I can't really filter that out super well. So I'm always just aware of what's going on, and I have a hard time really focusing on what someone is saying. So that's why I now work for the graduate admissions office at Marymount, and I have my own office, which is a godsend because now I can filter out the sound and just really focus on what needs to get done in my work.
Interesting. Have you had any aha moments and any encounters with students or folks that you work with that maybe had a different type of neurodiverse situation that you had to accommodate them in your experience?
I would say I've more had to make sure that I'm accommodating friends in the space. So friends that I have that are neurodiverse, I try to make sure that I am not putting my self-imposed views onto them.
Right.
And just making sure that if they're like, hey, I'm dealing with this, that I'm able to be like, that's okay, and not trying to, insist my sameness on people.
Grace, thank you so much for this conversation. We're going to continue after a break from our sponsors that help make Careology a reality. Cliff, thank you so much.
And we'll be right back with more Careology, the science of caring. Just a little over 2 minutes.
Why call 2 Men in a Truck of the Treasure Coast? You want to move your business without moving a single meeting? You want it handled with no fuss. Lots of stuff, no time to move it? You need the pros that care. That's why you call 2 Men in a Truck of the Treasure Coast. Family owned and operated franchise. Call 772-236-0827. 772-236-0827. Movers who care. Visit 2 Men in a Truck, treasurecoast.com. Create custom business signage that customers can't miss or resist. Let Design a Sign in Port St. Lucie help you get the job done right. Over 80 years combined experience. Get it right the first time. Call 772-337-4027 and tell them Roxy said to call. Remember, call 772-337-4020. Design a Sign in Port St. Lucie. Hi, this is Roxy from Careology, and I just want to talk about volunteering. Volunteers don't necessarily have the time, but they have the heart. It takes courage and dedication to offer your time and skills to help out a cause that is a noble act that deserves recognition. Volunteering is a great way to make a difference in our community, and CareBag needs your help. We are looking for dedicated volunteers. So please get a pen, get a paper, and take down this number. It's 772-222-7399. Call us and let us know you're interested. We are looking for volunteers for the evening hours between 5 and 8 p.m. to go to our soup kitchens with our new mobile hygiene pantry. I look forward to hearing from every one of you. And remember, volunteers don't necessarily have the time, but they have the heart. Thank you.
This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
We now return to Careology, the science of caring, and once again, here's your host, Miles McGrath.
Well, thanks again, and I am interviewing Grace McGrath, full disclosure, my daughter, and we're talking about neurodiversity, a subject that she is focused on because of her life experience. And due to this, I think you kind of made a little lemonade out of this kind of way you look at the world, Grace. You told me recently that you've partnered up to start a business where you consult to help businesses kind of understand neurodiversity, how they create a workplace that not just accommodates them, but that is open to the neurodiverse population. And I was shocked when I researching for this show. It's like one out of what was it, like 1 out of 50 people would be considered neurodiverse. Is that an accurate statistic?
I don't want to speak on that because I don't know if I have that information off the top of my head right now, but I would say neurodiversity includes a lot of things like mental health issues, PTSD. It includes like bipolar disorder. So there's a lot of people who are neurodiverse. It's not just autism or ADHD. It can include Tourette's syndrome, things like that. So it's not just one thing. So actually that very well might be true, but I can't confirm because I don't have that off the top of my head right now.
Got it. I'm not going to hold you to that. So how did this experience of being neurodiverse, kind of seeing the world in a different way, lead to, I want to help companies, associations, business have a broader view towards this population? How did that happen?
So it started when I was living in Montana. My friend Kira and I would have lunch or breakfast at a coffee shop nearby because it was during the height of COVID and we weren't really allowed to go into the office. So we were just sort of talking about, what we wanted to do in the world and what, benefit we wanted to bring with our knowledge. And so we decided, hey, there's not a lot of neurodiversity consulting businesses in the US or globally. And maybe that's like a niche we could fill with our lived experience. And so it took a while to sort of build up the website and build up our ideas and the content and things like that. But we launched it last year in June or July, and we had 4 clients last year. And so we sort of focus in the higher education space, but really we can work with any type of company. And we really want to help out students, and we want to help out businesses to better understand neurodiversity and how they can support their employees and students. So I've given talks, we've given presentations and things like that. And we really have had a good input from people. We've had a lot of great testimonials and things like that from the presentations that we've given. And we're going to hopefully have this year be as strong as last year. So that's the goal. And just generally, we want people to come away from our presentations with more empathy, with more understanding of the neurodiverse population, so they're better able to support their colleagues. Because when you don't have a supportive environment, a lot of neurodiverse people will leave and go on to something that is more supportive of them. So you're losing top talent when you're not supportive. And luckily, our clients all want to learn more and be better, and that's super great.
Wow, that was a lot. I'm amazed, really. As you, I'm proud of you. I'm amazed. How, when you work with these folks and you're training them, what are some of the ahas that you see kind of that happen over and over again? Do you see the light bulbs go on? They're like, oh, like, or do you? What happens during those sessions?
I think the last client we had is someone who I met through a talk that they gave. And so they have this business that they started within the higher education space. And we were given a presentation about how they can create neurodiverse friendly events. And we sort of went over the history of neurodiversity. And a lot of the ideas that we had for events they wanted to do really sparked a lot of ideas. They're like, that's a really great idea. This is something we already do, but we didn't know that this is also something that's supportive of the neurodiverse population. They had questions about making sensory friendly environments for spaces for events, and making sure that directions are clear, or that people are able to ask ample questions and things like that. And they were really happy with that. A lot of the things that they were doing were already geared that way to start with, so they already had a great foundation that they were working with. And it was just helpful to sort of see that they really cared and they really wanted to make their events more friendly and stuff like that, which was nice.
What are some, we talked about wayfinding. What are some of the things that we wouldn't really put into the space of helping the neurodiverse population? I'm just expanding my awareness myself here. Like, we were at a community event over the weekend and the music was really loud, and you're like, the music's too loud for me. It was a lot going on, and you said, it's because the way I experienced the world, it was just like, it wasn't enjoyable for you. So how does that translate into the workspace though?
There's always things you can't control. So like the event this weekend was really fun, but it's not something I could be at for the whole day, right? And so it's something that I can only handle for like a couple hours or so, right? And so it's understanding that people are going to have time to sort of decompress and sort of self-regulate and self-soothe and things like that. And so the world, unfortunately, isn't made for the neurodiverse person. It's made for the neurotypical population. But that doesn't mean that people can't sort of adapt when they need to. But we don't want people to have to adapt all the time, unfortunately. So that's something that a lot of people have to deal with, is just constantly adapting to whatever the world gives them. So it's something that I think, what do I want to say here? It's just, we want to make the world a better place, basically. Like, you want to make the world something that is more equitable to all, is what I would say. And yeah.
This awareness piece in communication is a really big thing for me, and how we come across, and the nuance of things. Would you say it's sometimes things can come across as being too straightforward or too blunt because you're not picking up on the nuance of things?
I would say I have a hard time with getting the nuance of things. Like, sarcasm is something I've never understood and probably never will get. But I think I appreciate when people are blunt with me and are just really straightforward, because then I can really tell what someone wants done. So like, especially with projects at work, when I get something to do, tell me exactly what you need done. I do not get the vagueness or the things you're trying to infer. Just really tell me what you want accomplished. And so I think that's the case with a lot of autistic people, especially as they really need direct instructions, and they want to know exactly what you want done. So they're not, making any mistakes or errors, because they know exactly things that you need, and they're not trying to infer things that maybe you think are obvious but they can't really tell about. So I think that's one of the event ideas we have for people, is to make sure you have clear instructions that maybe are printed out and things like that, so people can really get all the information they need and prepare ahead of time with like event instructions, or like how the event's laid out. And that was really helpful about the conference I went to in Atlanta. I showed up a day early and I went through the whole building, and I found out where all my rooms were. I looked at the maps, and I really planned out my day, because if I don't do that, I would have been overwhelmed or really confused about where I was supposed to go, and that would have made me sometimes shut down. And so that was helpful to sort of have maps that they had really clearly at the event. So that was something that they did that was really friendly to the neurodiverse population.
This is so amazing to me. It's opening up so many different, because it's so easy to judge somebody because they didn't do this or they didn't do that, or maybe they took things the wrong way. But when you kind of realize maybe that's just the way their brain works, it's not personal, it takes some of that judgment away. Like you kind of try to see things through their mind, and all of a sudden the judgment just, you almost feel bad for even judging in the first place. You realize that they see it that way. They don't have that ability to understand the nuance of it, or you might have criticized them because they took things too literally and they just weren't able to do it any other way. I mean, this is just, for me personally, a very powerful understanding. Do you have any other examples besides conferences and other areas that you're helping your clients with how they design their workspace, or is it a communication piece, or is it all the above?
I've done conversations with people that are in higher education, especially dealing with students who may be neurodiverse. And so something that I always say is, I'm a grad student myself at the moment, and I really appreciate when syllabi are really laid out that tell me exactly what I need to expect, right? And so I tell that to professors and academic folks, that you really want to make sure that if you want your students to do something, you're making that crystal clear and you're not assuming they're going to figure it out. So if you want people to come during office hours, make it super clear when those are, or really explain how you want people to set that type of stuff up so people aren't confused about how to do so. Really making sure, especially for the dyslexic population, you're using fonts that are really amenable to that, and you're making sure that it's easily readable, or people can change things to make sure they can understand the concepts that are being discussed in class. And understanding burnout signs. I think a lot of neurodiverse people get burnt out a lot easier because they constantly have to adapt to a world that isn't built for them. And really making sure, as someone in academia that you can sort of see that more than maybe they can themselves. And so just sort of reaching out and making sure you're being a good support system.
This is so important. I'm just thinking, as a parent, you want the best for your children, and it would be frustrating if you were pushing something on a neurodiverse child that was causing them high anxiety or high frustration, and you're just thinking, well, I'm being a good parent, I'm trying to expose them to a new thing, but you didn't know that they were overstimulated and this was just wearing them down. And just knowing that, as a would be very helpful, I would think. Realizing that you're making the problem worse, but you're just trying to be a good parent at the same time. So I mean, I would imagine this awareness has an effect on parents. They probably feel a little sense of guilt, like, oh, I didn't know. At least they're aware. I mean, it's same thing from an employer standpoint. If you are having problems with an employee that maybe they're really got a great work ethic, but they just need to be, like you say, the direction needs to be very, very literal for them. That could be a huge difference.
And a lot of people are more understanding these days. Like, neurodiversity is a term that more and more people are learning about. And so I think eventually we'll get to a point where almost everyone knows what it is and is more understanding of people's situations. And I think the more people that know, the better, in my opinion. And I think my LinkedIn is always talking about neurodiversity. Obviously, I'm in the space, so that's why what I'm seeing. But I'm glad to see a lot more of it these days, and people are really advocating for themselves, which is awesome.
So what resources can we point people to? You said do your research. What are some good resources, maybe some books or some websites that you would point somebody to that wants to get more information about this really important topic?
I think some good things to sort of look at if you really want a baseline understanding of what, maybe autism or ADHD or dyslexia are. The DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, is a great way to start to sort of get the information that people are diagnosed with. And then a book that I really recommend that I really loved reading is Workplace Neurodiversity Rising by Lyric Rivera. It's a great book. It really goes over how to support your neurodiverse colleagues and things like that. So it's a really helpful book if you are wanting to make your workplace more neurodiverse friendly. And of course, there's Neuro Awesome Life, which is run by my good friend Dawn Marie Hickshaw Solis. And so it's a super great website that goes over neurodiversity, and they do events and things like that, which is
Dawn
super.
Marie, what an
Yeah.
amazing human being.
Yeah, so she's actually hosting a conference, a virtual conference in April. So that's something to check out if you're interested in hearing from a lot of neurodiverse people, which is super cool.
So on your LinkedIn, they can search for Grace McGrath if
Yeah,
they
they-
want to connect with you.
Yeah, they can search my name. They can search Bloom Neurodiversity Support and Consulting. They can search either one of those. Yeah,
Bloom,
Neurodiversity.
that's your
Yeah,
collaboration?
that's the business with my friend Akira.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. And are there any YouTubers out there that are putting good content on that you would recommend that you'd see?
I'm trying to think. When I was doing my research for like women with autism, there's been so many, great people that have done videos, but I can't think of anyone off the top of my head right now because I just really dug into it that's one thing about autism is a special interest. So that was a huge special interest of mine for a very long time, was just learning as much as I could about autism. But I can't.
Would you say that's like going down the rabbit hole?
Yeah, very much. It's like even it's very extreme. Like I think when I was growing up, I was obsessed with Vera Bradley. I had to know all the prints, the seasons, what they were doing coming up. Like I had that memorized, like what was happening.
Right.
And that was a huge special interest of mine. And then the show Criminal Minds was another special interest I've seen. Can tell you what almost happens in every single episode and things like that. So special interests are a huge thing within the neurodiversity community. And so I can't think of any YouTubers off the top of my head, but if you just search like women with autism or just autism in general on YouTube, there's so much out there, which is really great content.
What are some do's and don'ts when you realize that somebody you care about might be neurodiverse, or somebody you work with might be neurodiverse? What do you recommend you do? Like as somebody who's, there's something just off about this person. What would you coach and counsel them to do?
I think a lot of people, when they think of, autism or ADHD, they think of it as like a disorder that needs to be cured. And I think if someone is telling you, hey, I have autism or something like that, don't look at them like, oh, that's like a disease, or like that's something that they need to get fixed, right? That's really a huge part of people's identity. That's something that's really important to them. There's things with autism that are really challenging for me. There's a lot of things that make me a super great person, in my opinion. So I think there's a lot of ability for people to use neurodiversity in a way that's beneficial for them in their life. And so you don't want to discourage people from doing things, but you also want to understand maybe someone needs these boundaries set up for them personally based on the conditions that they have. And I think I'll go back to this, and I mentioned it earlier, is if someone's being open and honest with you about something that they have going on, just be understanding. And you don't have to be an expert. And it's highly unlikely that everyone's going to become an expert, right? But just understand someone's being honest with me, and I should accept that and just be welcoming to that, and learn with them as they figure out their identity. My mom was super helpful with being supportive and just helping me reflect back on my life once I figured out that I had autism, just looking at things that had occurred and just being helpful and understanding with that. Because oftentimes, especially when you're late diagnosed in life, like I was diagnosed in like 2021, it was helpful not to self-loathe throughout the process, because oftentimes it'll be like, how could I not know sooner, and how did I survive? And it's like, well, there's no going back in time. So it's important to reflect back on the past and how things could have improved, but also look at your future and how you can make things better for yourself now.
Amazing viewpoint. So what you're saying is, if I try to internalize all this, is that if somebody is willing to be open about their state, they're neurodiverse, they're really opening up to you.
Mm-hmm.
And it is not easy to do. You're opening up here on the radio today, and that's part of your mission. But there may be somebody in your life that knows this, or maybe not know this, and they're sharing that you should honor that and not use it as a leverage against them. Right. That's what you're saying.
They're trusting you.
Yeah.
That's they're really showing you, hey, I care about you enough to let you know this information. And as I mentioned earlier, like a lot of people who are neurodiverse are underemployed or unemployed because people are discriminated against based off being neurodiverse because people are afraid of what that could bring to their organization. So oftentimes people aren't even honest about what they're going through because they're afraid they'll get fired. I know once I figured out that I had autism, I went down the rabbit hole of documentaries that was sort of describing how it was really hard to get hired if you had autism or something like that. And I was like, am I ever going to get employed again if I'm honest with what I'm dealing with? And luckily I was able to, figure it out, and I had some accepting bosses and supervisors, but that's really not the case for everyone, unfortunately. So, really make sure that you're sussing out if your place is safe or people around you are safe. And so that's something to, unfortunately, people have to deal with a lot.
There's something that we bring our own viewpoints of the world, our ethnocentricities with us, where we go and we think everybody sees the world the way we see the world. So that's our bias that we bring. And if anything, what you've taught me today is that not everybody sees the world the way I see the world or the way you see the world. And so we think because we could handle something a certain way, or because it's everybody else should do it that way. And I think if anything, it's just not the case. So we kind of put people down, or we say they don't have the courage to do it, or this or that. It's maybe not that. Maybe it's they're seeing the world in a totally different way. And as we bring more perspectives to the table in any business or in school, wouldn't you agree that it's going to have better outcomes, that you give different perspectives on things?
I would say for sure. I mean, a lot of neurodiverse people have really unique ideas that can solve problems that maybe the typical person doesn't have, right? So it's really helpful to be accepting. And I think something that I go back to is within my role at Marymount, I oversee our graduate assistants. And what I've learned in that role is to give people the tools and allow them to go from there, right? So there's things that need to get done, and that's something you can do with your neurodiverse employees. There are things that need to get done, but allow them to do it their own unique way and ask for help when needed. And don't be judgmental when people are trying to, figure out their own way. So I think that's something that I try to do, and hopefully I'm doing as good as I can in that, but I try to make sure that I'm not placing my assumptions on how things should get done. I'm giving people the tools and the guidance when it's needed.
This just brought up something for me, was this figuring things out piece and knowing when to ask for help. Do you find that in your experience that's something you struggle with, trying to figure it out on your own and not asking for help sooner?
I really love to ask a lot of questions. So immediately when I get a project, I'm always trying to make sure I'm asking all the questions possible so I don't have to go back to ask for help. But I'm not afraid to ask for help. If I'm confused, I want that cleared up. And I try to, write down what needs to get done. So I have clear instructions that I have written down. But I like to problem solve myself too. So sometimes before I ask for help, I like to try my best, like look up things on Google, things like that, sort of figure out what needs to happen. But I'm not afraid to ask for help by any means, because I don't want to do something incorrectly and then have someone say, why didn't you ask for help, when I was trying to problem solve myself sometimes.
So when you say you don't want to do something incorrectly, is that a fear that you're going to make a mistake? Or?
Yeah, I think so, where it's like because I don't really understand the subliminal sometimes messaging that people are trying to get across. So I don't want to assume that and then do something incorrectly, then have them say, that's not what I was assuming you would do, right? So I really want those clear, instructions to sort of figure out what needs to happen.
Gotcha. I gotcha. It really is so revealing about many encounters I've had over the years, and thinking about, I'm wondering, different clients that may have, looked at the world this way. It would have been very helpful in my communicating with them had I known these just not techniques, so to speak, but the way they see the world. I could have provided my information differently to be more of what they were looking for, instead of trying to push it through the way I would want it to have. This is really, I think, helpful for anybody who's training a group of people. They should be cognizant of the fact that there could be people in the room that are going to take in that information way different. and they should be very literal about certain things at times during their presentation to make sure they're, bringing the whole group together. That really is extremely, extremely helpful. Because we all are struggling to get through this world, and we think things are a certain way, and then you realize not everybody sees the world the same way you do. And I think that really probably translates to a lot of folks that find themselves in a homeless situation, right? Maybe they don't see the world the same way we see the world. Maybe they have certain fears about things. Maybe because of the way they see the world, they weren't able to get work. All these things like that could translate into the fact that now they're living out of their car or what have you. So this is really kind of ties into how we help people. What help do they really need? Maybe it's just clearer directions, So with our last couple of minutes, Grace, can you please take us, what is the website for your business if companies want consulting on neurodiversity? What is that website?
The best way to find us is on LinkedIn, because we have all our posts and all our great information there. So I think just looking up Bloom Neurodiversity on LinkedIn is a great way to find us, and our website is linked there. And that's really all the great information for us there.
Bloom
Neurodiversity.
Yes. On LinkedIn.
Yes.
Okay. And you've got a project that you're working on, a book. And what is that book that what is that book about?
So the book is a collection of short stories. So they're all about identities that I have, but the stories aren't about me. And so one of the stories is about neurodiversity. And so I'm sort of taking you through the life of a character who's figuring out that they're neurodiverse themselves. And so that's one of the stories, but then another one's on just general mental health. One's on sort of dealing with grief, and then one's on sexuality and gender.
So if you're a publisher out there, Miss Grace is looking for a publisher of this book. So reach out to her on LinkedIn. This has been Careology. We're so grateful you tuned in. We're grateful that you tuned in on the web as well. This is Miles McGrath with Grace McGrath. Cliff, thanks for managing another wonderful show.
Why, certainly. We appreciate you being here as well. Careology, the science of caring. The edition for March 4th, 2024 is now in the books. Okay. All righty. And remember, this is WPSL, Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast, webcaster to the world on Google Home, Alexa, and of course the TuneIn app on your smartphone. And of course, the time right now is just about 11 o'clock.